Back in the 80s, when I was going to university, I got a part-time job working in a sub shop on the main drag downtown. A submarine sandwich shop on the main drag downtown. I worked evenings on the weekend, which kind of sucked, but I needed the money. It wasn't much of a job, but I could usually study the first part of the evening when things were pretty dead. A few people would drop by and grab a sub to take home or stop for a quick bite, but we seldom had more than a few customers per hour. It was after midnight things started to get hectic, when the bars were closing. I worked with a young blonde woman named Gladys. Yeah, Gladys. Really. She was a nice enough person, if not particularly bright, but she was an attractor. An attractor. And what did she attract? Well, later in the evening, groups of young men, local high school students, would come into the shop to basically harass her and me. Oh, they'd order something in order to hang around, and then become total little pains in the butt. They would talk loud, drop numerous F-bombs, make crude sexual references, grind their export-A cigarette butts into the lino, throw paper, and sometimes slices of tomato and other hunks of food at each other, and repeatedly come to the counter to ask for extra salt, or extra pepper, or ketchup, or napkins, or plastic cutlery, like plastic knives and forks, which they would then throw at one another. Why do you need a plastic knife to eat a sub? But just try to tell them no. Then you'd have to listen to a sullen, long-winded teenage complaint about your poor service. In a word, they were obnoxious. Gladys had a tattooed boyfriend, a biker, and when he was around, the punks got their subs and left in a hurry. But he wasn't around all that much. As for me, the kids knew I was a student, and even though I'm a pretty big guy, they weren't the least bit afraid of me. In fact, I heard them refer to me as Poindexter behind my back. Whenever I saw them coming, I'd send Gladys to the back of the store and deal with them myself. I'd take their orders and make their sandwiches in slow motion, so they became impatient and were glad to grab their grub and go. 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 Glad to... Sorry, got a little carried away there. Sorry, back to the story. I would also tune into the local easy listening station and crank it up over the loudspeakers, knowing the elevator music would increase their desire to leave. Better yet, sometimes I could find a station playing polka time, polka hour, polkas. That would get them to leave immediately. The trouble began the night Humongous walked into the shop. It was the biggest human being I had ever laid eyes on. He must have been at least 8 feet tall. In fact, he had to duck when he came in the front door. Gladys and I just stared. Not only was he gigantic, he was ugly too, with a bullet-shaped head and a swarthy face. He wore a shiny black suit with a black dress shirt buttoned up at the neck, in spite of it being a warm night. He didn't smell too good either. He came up to the counter with an odd shambling walk, and in a loud metallic voice, which didn't sound quite human, he said, "I want 6 meatball subs, 6 of them, with everything on them, everything, 6 meatball subs." Normally, I would have questioned such an insane order, but not with this dude. Gladys and I looked at each other, then silently began making the sandwiches. He paid with a $100 bill, which I was praying was real as I counted out his change. Humongous then sat down at a table by the window. I wasn't sure the chair would hold him, but it did. And he began to eat his subs by shoving them into his wide mouth in one continuous gesture. It was more like he was absorbing the food rather than eating it. He didn't even remove the wrapping paper. And that's when the punks exploded through the front door, saw the strange dude, and stopped dead in their tracks. It was the usual gang of four troublemakers. For several seconds, nothing happened. And then the lead shithead, I think his name was Deke, grabbed one of the huge guy's subs. Big mistake. Big mistake. Things happened rather quickly, for a pink and yellow snake, or tentacle, whipped out and wrapped itself around Deke's wrist, making him drop the sub, and then there was a loud snap, the snap of breaking bone, and the jerk was screaming in agony. Then another punk, I think this one was called John, pulls out a switchblade and goes for the guy. He swiped at him and missed, but sliced open the front of the big dude's jacket and shirt. And that's when the screaming really started. For instead of a man's chest, the slash revealed a nest of writhing tentacles. Tentacles, some with hooks at the end, some with eyes, tentacles which shot out across the room. One of the punks had already run out screaming into the night, while another was snared around the throat by one of the octopus arms, one of the tentacles. He was pulled off his feet, dragged across the room, and then Humongous started butting his head against Deke's, banging their heads together, like some gag from the Three Stooges. It would have been funny. Hell, it was funny. We were literally screaming with laughter. Or literally screaming. The kid with the knife then ran forward and slammed it into the monster man's chest. Another big mistake. A disgusting green ichor spurted across the room. Was it Humongous's blood? It must have been like acid, as the kid with the knife began screaming and pulling at his face. His face, which was actually smoking. Meanwhile, the grotesque giant staggered up, then fell to the floor with a thud that jarred the entire building, as a pool of green slime quickly formed around him. I grabbed Gladys by the elbow and ran back into the kitchen, then through the back door into the alley. This was the era before cell phones, so we used the phone at a nearby convenience store to A, call the cops, B, call Gladys's biker boyfriend, and C, call the boss. I waited for the cops outside the door to the shop, too afraid to go in, too afraid to even look inside. Inside, there was a terrible, noisome stench. P.U. And a scene of total carnage. 3 dead, 1 strangled, 1 with a fractured skull, 1 suffering what appeared to be radiation burns. But what they didn't find was Humongous. Humongous. What happened to him? Did he just get up and leave? Someone would have been sure to have seen it. Or did he simply just vanish, dissolve into thin air, fade away into nothingness? In the end, the cops put it down to a gang fight, although how they explained the radiation burns is beyond me. Gladys and I both quit our jobs the next day, and the shop was closed for several weeks, but eventually reopened. It may be there still today. And that would have been that. But Humongous left something behind. A book, which I took when the cops weren't looking. I have it still. It's a weird old book, full of strange diagrams, the pages in faded Latin and English, and very hard to make out. But on the flyleaf there's a name. The owner's name, perhaps. Wilbur Whately, whoever he was. I can also make out what must be the title of the book. It's called the Necronomicon. The Necronomicon. Necronomicon. That name sounds familiar, but I can't recall just where I heard it before. Gee, if I could only read it. The moral of the story: it's okay to read while eating alone, but if you're reading the Necronomicon, you'd best eat deviled ham and eggs, followed by devil's food cake, all washed down with demon rum. But whatever you eat, just make sure your food is out of this world. Eldridge Subs, a homage to HPL. It had been a rather humid evening. I'd drunk a bellyful of beer and was now extremely hungry. But I was lost. I'd gotten separated from my friends and had gotten lost. 2 years in this university town, and I managed to get lost? Damn Narragansett. I'd wandered into a street, more like an alley, a street that I didn't recognize. The lighting was poor, and the overhanging gambrel arches of the ancient buildings didn't help. I thought about retracing my steps when I saw the sign. Eldritch Subs. Eldritch Subs. It was in red lettering against a putrid green background. Not very appetizing to look at. But I was ravenous, simply ravenous. I crossed the wet pavement and staggered in, and almost immediately staggered out again. My nostrils were flared by an overpoweringly fetid stench, and I suddenly felt quite ill. But then I heard a husky feminine voice drawl, "Good evening." A woman stood at the counter, staring at me. She was dark, smallish, and very good-looking, except for huge staring eyes. She was dressed entirely in black, and I felt an immediate attraction to her, but with an undercurrent of repulsion. I dithered, which we will blame on the beer, and while I dithered, I made the mistake of gazing into her bulging, watery, gray-green eyes. And then I walked, like a somnambulist, over to a table, where I sat, or collapsed. The lady in black stalked over to me, and in her husky voice said, You hunger? Oh, well, I did, I sputtered. But now I feel like I'm going to be sick to my stomach. And so I did. But I also felt overpowered by a will much stronger than my own. Nevertheless, you will eat. You must eat. I must admit, I was only half listening. I was fighting the urge to vomit. Our subs are highly spiced, and I suggest you accompany your repast with one of our hearty wines. One of our hearty red wines. Red. I took a deep breath to try to get my stomach under control, and I began to choke and cough, and for the first time, I noticed that the place was full of smoke. "What's with all this smoke?" I gasped. "Is this place on fire?" "Oh, no," the young woman said. "That is merely incense. Incense to cover the smell." The lady in black had sat down beside me and had reached across the table to stroke my arm. To cover the smell?" I repeated weakly. "Oh, we use pungent spices, which some find overpowering." "I find the stench of this incense overpowering." "What sort of spices do you use?" "Oh," she said quietly, "hemlock, henbane, saffron, poppy seed, aloe, opium, and, of course, parsley, but no garlic." I was so taken aback, I was aghast. I said, "If you ingest that stuff, you'll die. What kind of subs need that kind of seasoning?" "Flesh, meat," she said quickly, correcting herself. But still, I heard what she had said. Flesh. Flesh? I don't know what exactly I would have done next, but a posse of weird creatures, cryptids, monsters, had exploded through the front door. 4 things with grayish-green bodies, roughly bipedal, with a forward slumping and vaguely canine cast. That was bad enough, but the thing they carried was worse. A gray-white human figure, male and flaccid, as if it was unconscious. Unconscious or dead. I jumped to my feet and screamed, "What is that? Was that a corpse?" No, the dark girl tried to calm me. "That was a new employee, new kitchen help." It hit me then, and yeah, I was more than a tad befuddled. Flesh. Human flesh? I staggered towards the front door, and she clutched at me with her long black nails, her long black claws, which dug into my flesh, and not only tore my shirt but drew blood. I smashed through the glass doors, which shattered, the shards scattering across the cobblestones, where I sprawled face first in the muck and mire. I twisted around to look behind me, and saw the young woman standing in the doorway, her black sleeves raised, making her look like a witch or an enormous bat as she shrieked, "You shall not escape us!" And then the doorway turned into a gaping maw, a humongous, slobbering mouth with fangs and a black, forked tongue. I felt myself pull towards it, as if some unseen force had grabbed me by the ankles, and then I passed out. My buddies found me lying in a dark and empty alleyway. When I tried to tell them about eldritch subs and the lady in black, they put it down to the beer talking. All right, to the beer ranting. But that didn't explain the long red scratches on my left arm or the tears in my shirt where she had clawed me. I don't go out drinking with the boys anymore, and I've totally lost my appetite. I've lost over 60 pounds, and I wasn't overweight to begin with. But I see the lady in black every night as I dream. I dream that I'm reeling along in some dark place, sometimes an alleyway, sometimes a wide but deserted street. But always there is some fast food joint, some sinister beanery, and of course she is there, standing in the doorway. Last night it was Mythos Burgers, home of the Cthulhu fish sandwich. She stares at me with her huge bulging eyes and smiles at me, a hungry, predatory smile. And then she raises her arms like a witch or an enormous bat, and the doorway once again turns into a gaping maw, a humongous slobbering mouth with fangs and a black pointed tongue. And once more I find myself pulled towards it, as if some unseen force had grabbed me by the ankles. And then I wake up. But one night, it will succeed in swallowing me, and I shall find myself in the belly of the beast. The moral of our story: should a man drink Narragansett beer while reading H.P. Lovecraft at Christmas time, indigestion will be the least of his problems. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,500 subs. Till midnight. Cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix Here, that's PX Here, while the music was Living in the Dark by the incredibly talented Mayu. Thank you for listening.